the last 12 to 18 months, what's the most important shift that you've seen in how the financial services industry thinks about data and AI?
Yeah.
More importantly, like what has changed, what hasn't changed for the better and for the worse?
That's a good question. Things are changing so fast that, in the last 12 months, I would say probably a little bit more pragmatism around the use of AI in banking. So a little less hype and a more like practicality about how I'm using those new technologies and adopting that technology, both as a senior executive all the way down to business processes and workflow and automation. So one thing, for instance, that we can see is that a few years ago, it was really a kind of Q&A on the chatbot and asking questions and getting like a full report, to something much more to the point, much more around automation, and much less around that chat fatigue that I keep saying, around like being overwhelmed with chatbot all over the place.
Yeah, which I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday. It's like, hey, we went from you can just click something once and you get what you want, to this desire that anything and everything has to have a chat interface, which doesn't make sense for repetitive tasks that you deal with very often.
Human is not the primary user of AI now. It's really like machine and process and being able to kick off an entire process and workflow in banking. And there are tons of those legacy processes that are ripe for automation.
When an executive team says, hey, Antoine, we're going big on AI, what's kind of the first uncomfortable reality that you bring up to them so that they are aware of what the risk and the trade-offs are?
Okay, so if an executive saying we're gonna big on AI, for me, that's already a red flag. That makes me cringe, because that means like AI shouldn't be here solving all the problems that we ignored over the past few years, that suddenly AI will make that possible. I mean, did we say in the past we're going big on data or we're going big on technology? I think AI is just an evolution, and it shouldn't be necessarily be a shortcut of ignoring all the different problems that we have. So that's a kind of red flag. How do we address that? I think we need to go back to the basic of what powers all those AI initiatives of yours, and that becoming more data-driven. We don't say it's an AI-driven company, it's a data-driven company. How do we work those kind of foundation for you to realize the value of that AI investment of yours?
Do you think, though, I know you mentioned data-driven, but do you think that to some extent sometimes becomes like a easy scapegoat of like, hey, we're going to become data-driven also? Because I've seen every organization wants to be data-driven.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So also, what does that mean to be data-driven? First, that means being able to take decision based on information we have. So collecting all the information we need, trusting that information, being able to take those decisions. But then if that decision does not translate back into action, we're not really data-driven. So intelligence is become actionable, and action needs to be more intelligence. And the more you can start bridging that gap from analytics to operation, the more you start becoming data-driven. Data is informing your decisions are driving your action.
You are walking into a messy enterprise, or a messy enterprise situation, I should say. What's your rule of thumb on what you seek to tackle first, especially within the realm of financial services, which we know has a lot of legacy systems and all sorts of things from over the years?
So there will be two aspects, from a data perspective, from a data strategy perspective, and then will be also from a use case approach. So from a data, when things are a mess across the different silos, and how do we start building that data strategy? Which end do we start putting that spaghetti plate thing? I've always been looking at the highest reusability for the investment we make. If you think of bringing and solving that use case first, might not necessarily be the top priority use case, but that will drive the maximum reusability, and every secondary use case you build will benefit from those kind of pipeline that you're creating. That becomes a fantastic way to start your data strategy based on value added and not just based on one use case at a time. From a use case perspective as well, there is also what's ripe for automation. Where do we see the massive friction between different systems and handoffs from one system to another, where potentially bottleneck, where data and AI could solve and drive a lot of that automation and enhance quality of your business processes.
Does the shift to AI, does it feel a lot of like the whole RPA type movement thing?
Oh, that's a good point. RPA, I think there are lots of people still have like scar of like that kind of RPA motion. I think it's a new generation, but with far better chances of succeeding there. The reason why it couldn't necessarily succeed in the past, it's not just about connecting different systems together, it's about that smart decisioning and those rules. And AI is good at something which is not being just black or white or one or zero, but being able to understand and pick the nuances that would drive this action over that one. Why do we go into a secondary process? Why do we call this secondary API? Why do we kick off that specific workflow? Is a much more chance to be orchestrated nicely with AI than with rule-based systems and RPA automation that we had in the past.
What's the most common architecture mistake you see as companies undergo modernization efforts within financial services industry?
The patterns of yesterday might become the anti-pattern of today because things are constantly evolving. Technology has changed, and what we did a few years ago might not necessarily be like the best-in-class architectural pattern because we didn't have the right technology at that time. Like, for instance, the use of OLTP. And so you have a bank that is really split between the analytics and the operation, between OLAP and OLTP. And that means a lot of friction to be able to bring those two worlds together. Now with a component like Databricks and Lakebase, we start bringing those two worlds together. So that becomes a standard pattern to run analytics and intelligent action in banking today. But that doesn't mean that it was an anti-pattern before. That just means that we didn't have the right technology. If I think in terms of the anti-pattern from AI, there might be also the use of agent, and that's pool of agents that is happening. How do we find the right threshold of number of agents we need in order to do a job right? One massive agent to rule them all, that's not gonna work. Thousands of different pool agents that we have no idea how to control, that's not gonna work. There is no hard rule of the right number, but that will be domain specific and being able to architect those agent framework the right way.
What are the few capabilities that around data and AI that you think are must-haves for anything to be production grade in today's era within financial services?
So in today's modern era, what does that mean to be production grade in regulated industry? I think there's security and compliance. Those first two, like, how do we address that? So from a security standpoint, I'm making sure that nobody has the access that they don't need, that everything is protected from a data, from a model, from an asset, from a notebook. From a compliance, there is also all that explainability of understanding that the right model is being used, that is following your local jurisdiction as well. We cannot afford to take any model like from online and just like run some credit decisioning. We have things that we need to obviously to comply with. So from a security, the anti-pattern would be that how do we make sure that we don't lock data so much that nobody has access to? That's the most security you can get, but nobody has any access to that data. So instead of trying to lock your data so much so that it looks like a safe that nobody has access, it's more about granting you access, but being able to have the full traceability of how that access is being used, or the lineage of the data you use, all the models that you build, and then being able to revoke access as well and offboard users. So it shouldn't be of you have access to everything or nothing. It should be driven by the use case and traced through the entire like lineage and life cycle of your use case.
Which, fairness, is something I know Databricks heavily likes to promote, which with through the Unity catalog.
Unity catalog and lineage for me are probably yes the most important feature in today's world with all those interconnected like dependencies from a model to a dashboard to a query to a genie to an agent to a process to a pipeline.
And it's a non-flashy stuff, but it's what you need.
Oh, it's the boring.
Yeah.
What I like is this was probably the activity that most engineers not hated in the most in the past, but data governance. Nobody wants like to keep an Excel spreadsheet of that classification of data and everything. It turns out that this is probably the most strategic thing that we can do in today's AI era.
When Gen AI enters the picture, what is your framework for where it adds value to those financial services workflows that we just talked about without introducing unacceptable risk? And really, how do you draw that line?
I think there is first, if Gen AI is here to make that final decision around like underwriting that loan or assessing that claim or executing that trade, that's probably like where I would probably draw that line and say that should be the role of a human more than a Gen AI, or a more deterministic model than a Gen AI. But in order to start addressing some of those most complex workflows where the line is not necessarily that clear, I think it's less on the quality of the agent and the model. It's more about the context and the reasoning. I need to be able to have the comfort that I can see the full trace, the full evidence of why the model decided to go down that path or this path. And I think the reasoning capability of a model is far more important today almost than the output and the blurb of text that it will eventually speak out. I need to understand the reason behind. So that's probably a criteria of me using this model or that model for that specific task is the level of explainability of that reasoning. And the use cases that we go after, I said, is around like that decision making done by a model or human. So I tend to go for use cases that rely a lot on human manual effort, such as taking a PDF document and rewriting text somewhere else, or extracting an Excel spreadsheet and re-entering that into an agent, into a UI. All of those that can introduce some human errors that will be alleviated right away with the use of a model.
Looking ahead to the next 18 to 24 months, how do you think that the data and AI landscape is going to change for the better and also for the parts that for the worse?
I think a lot of those decisions will be completely we will not even know that AI is driving a lot of those different processes. AI will be so prevalent, or is already so prevalent, that it will be completely transparent and accepted as a de facto way of doing like banking and middle and back office automation and processing will all be, or a lot will be driven by AI without even us as end user realizing that. So, and I think that's the biggest success, because if we think about AI not being hype, that means AI being accepted as a default standard in all of our different business process automations.
AI as a tool and not as the destination.
AI as a tool driving value and not as a destination, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, the time whenever it gets to be so ubiquitous, like Excel.
I mean, that's yes, no, that's exactly
yeah. It's like
and
you don't
boring,
think about it.
Boring, and yes, and used everywhere by everything, but and adopted as a default standard. And we understand the risk associated with that. We obviously know what use case where we need human versus use cases that we can delegate to people, and we'll find new ways of working. I'm an engineer. I love to code. Am I still coding today? I'm still coding, but I'm leveraging AI as a copilot as a way to make my job better and easier. So I think I've accepted vibe coding as a new way of working alongside AI.
Why should prospective customers within the financial services industry consider Databricks as the platform for most, if not all, of their data and AI efforts?
Seeing how we've all been beat in the past by proprietary systems and trying to get off those systems to move to a next state. And I think we're always playing catch up. The best possible choice you have today is to keep your options open and to drive interoperability. So tomorrow's best practices will be part of your strategy because you set the foundation to be open, modular, and interoperable. So that lies from your governance, from your access security, from your control, from your compliance, from your processing, from your AI, from your models.
Thank you so very much for your time.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you.